Welcome to the channel, everyone. On this channel, we share stories of average Joes around the world and their not so average issues. Let's start with the first story. Am I in the wrong for supporting my grandfather even after he hit my grandmother and kicked her out of the house? I, 23 male, am in a dilemma because of some family drama that has gone down recently, which resulted in almost all of my family taking my grandmother's side against my grandpa. I decided to sympathize with him because I felt that he deserved someone's support instead of being alienated by the entire family, and now I'm being subjected to a lot of mean comments and dirty looks from my parents and other relatives. I need to know if I'm in the wrong for taking my grandfather's side over my grandmother's. To give you some context, my grandparents have had a rocky relationship for as long as I have known them. In fact, they've been unstable since even before I was born, perhaps from the time of their marriage, which allegedly messed up my mom's childhood to an unspeakable extent. To summarize, my grandmother got married to my grandfather as a young girl who had just passed puberty. It was an arranged marriage, and the connection was made through a mutual friend of their parents. At the time, my grandfather was a groom who was in demand as he was the only one in his village to have a well-paying government job and a good educational background. He was bound to be well off, and many people in the village wanted to marry their daughters away to him as they were sure of his secure future. Due to this strong reputation, no one from my grandmother's family thought to double-check if he would be suitable as a person for my grandmother. Instead, Grandma was told that she had to impress Grandpa no matter what in order to be able to lead a good life and fulfill her responsibility of being a good wife and a good mother someday. Yeah, their thought processes around marriage and relationships differed a lot from today's. Anyway, my grandpa took a liking to my grandmother and they were married. Soon after their marriage, Grandpa's government job earned him a promotion and a transfer to the city, and they soon left the village for a different kind of life. Now that they weren't living in a joint family household with other relatives, things changed between them. My grandfather's treatment towards my grandmother became harsher and more demanding. Now, this was nothing unusual, as in my culture, it is considered a sign of strength for the male head of the family to be a tough guy. Besides, he provided for Grandma and made sure they had a roof over their heads. My grandmother had grown up knowing not to expect any love from her marriage. Weddings in the village happened so that a family could rid themselves of the burden of having a girl, and another family could have a female helper to cook meals for the men and keep their houses clean and bear their children. Anyway, you get it. The point I'm trying to make is that their marriage was never done on the right terms to begin with. So, no wonder they had and still have a lot of problems which they've passed on to the rest of the family. Lol. No part of my mother's childhood was happy, and this was because her father, or my grandfather, was the big-time miser who was selfish with his money. My grandmother wasn't allowed to work, so it was up to him to provide money for the household's needs. But my grandfather didn't care about any of that. He would not even give her enough money to buy vegetables or meat to make food. Yet he expected his meals every day to be delicious and for there to be 5 varieties of dishes to eat. This often resulted in huge fights as he accused grandmother of starving him while she blamed him for not giving her enough money to buy the required ingredients. In between these were caught their 3 children who grew up in malnutrition and were poorly fed and looked after. Money was an issue even when it came to the children's clothes or basic school necessities like books and stationery. My grandfather insisted that they reuse school uniforms that were years and years old. My mother and her siblings had to treasure their books and stationery and use them sparsely because they knew they wouldn't get new ones no matter how much they begged and pleaded. Then started the bad-mouthing and the gossiping. Since the atmosphere in the house was so full of tension, Grandpa would spend most of his time outside with his friends and often our neighbors. He would only come to eat and sleep. He was constantly complaining about my grandma to his friends and would tell everyone that she was a bad woman who would verbally abuse him at home. He also spread rumors that she refused to cook for him and that she was trying to starve him to death so she could take all of his money. The thing is, he was really nice to his friends and neighbors and often helped them out of tough financial situations by lending them money. He wouldn't give his own children a penny, but would buy gifts for his friends' sons and daughters. All of this ultimately led to everyone having a bad impression of my grandmother. They pitied Grandpa for being trapped in marriage with what they knew to be my evil and merciless grandmother. Word of this spread around the neighborhood too, meaning that my grandmother was deprived of having any friends. People treated her unkindly and often called her names behind her back. My grandmother was thus cut off from having any social or financial support. At times, where my grandfather would abuse her and was cruel enough to lock her outside the house at night as punishment, there was nobody she could go to for help. At the same time, she only had my grandfather to depend on for the scarce money that he gave her now and then. Not to mention, she was raising 3 children who didn't get the proper food and other supplies they needed to do well in life. As the children grew up and left the household one by one for better lives, they left behind my grandma with her emotionally abusive husband who would take any chance to berate her and put her down for being a bad wife and mother. Grandma had no help out of this situation as she had no friends or neighbors who were willing to hear her side of the story. And my grandfather basically held her hostage as her good behavior would determine whether she got the money she needed to feed herself. He often withheld money from her as punishment and she had to go without food for days while he ate to his fill outside. Everyone in the family knows of this abuse. Yet, no one can do anything as my grandma refuses any help. She feels that this is what she deserves. All the children, my mother and her sister and brother, hate Grandpa and they don't talk to him anymore. The issue today is that Grandpa well and truly went over the line recently as he hit my grandmother for talking back and forced her out of the house for 2 whole nights. Obviously, everyone is horrified and arrangements are being made for my grandmother to fly out so she can live with my aunt for a while. Initially, I was so angry when I get news of this that I called Grandpa right away so I could have some words with him. I have always been told these stories of my grandfather, so I've always been told to hate him. However, I was taken aback when the call led to an actual conversation where he confessed that he was only acting out because he wanted his children's attention too in his old age. Everyone always takes care of Grandma, and no one thinks to check up on Grandpa because they unanimously hate him. He expressed to me that he felt absolutely heartbroken by this. It doesn't help that he only recently had a heart surgery that left him with a deteriorating health, and no one had been to see him or ask him about his well-being. Basically, I feel bad for the old man and I feel that he deserves another chance. I feel that if we treat him as family, everyone's relationship would improve. But every time I try to bring this up, they all look at me like I'm the villain. Am I in the wrong for taking my grandfather's side? Am I in the wrong if I take our savings to buy a house and not let my husband move with us? My husband, 34 male, and I, 31 female, have 5 children, 1 from a previous relationship that my husband has adopted, and 4 together. We've had a rough go at our marriage. We jumped in quickly and were not prepared. We separated once before, about 2 years after we got married, and managed to rekindle our relationship. We've now been married over 11 years, and I've been miserable for the last 2 of them. I've expressed this to him several times, telling him I wanted to work on our marriage, and he has continued to ignore my request and leaves the conversation quickly when it's brought up. He is the type to make repetitive small promises and never follow through. He says things like, "Don't worry about taking out the trash, I'll do it in a few minutes," and never actually does it. The trash will still be sitting there hours later when I get home from work, getting groceries or whatever. He's shown me in recent years that he is incredibly unreliable when it comes to almost everything in our daily life. I'm ready to move on with my life, though financially it is terrifying because he has a much larger income than I do. We have saved a good portion of our income for the last few years to upgrade our living situation. We own our home outright, but it's simply too small for our family. We also hate the lot and don't think it'll be prudent to build on. Now, having decided that I'm ready to leave, I'd still like to use our savings to buy a house, but it'd then be just for myself and our kids. I'd leave him with our house that is paid off as well as the truck he drives, which is in my name, which is currently worth twice what we owe on it. My car is an old rusty Suburban that gets me from point A to point B, but will eventually need to be replaced. So, am I in the wrong if I take our savings, which is meant for a home purchase, to buy a home, but not let my husband move with my children and I? Am I in the wrong for serving papers to my ex when they came to town to get married? Okay, so here's the backstory. I'll try to keep it compact and to the point. I, 28 female, had a child with 29 male when I was 15 and he was 16. We stayed together through high school. He worked and supported our child and wanted to be together forever. After we graduated high school, we broke up and I was no longer happy and wanted more. More turned out to be me partying and ending up in rehab 2 years after we graduated. I ended up going to rehab 3 times within a year. While I was in rehab, my family mostly took care of our child. He took care of him one time when I went to treatment with his new girlfriend, who wanted me out of the picture. The new girlfriend was a nightmare. By the time I had 1 year sober, 2014, we went to court for custody. He won domiciliary. Fast forward 7 months, he gives me full custody, not on paper, back. His girlfriend hit our child and he lost his job and said I needed to take care of our child. No problem, we actually got along and co-parented well. I want to mention from the time I went to rehab, 2012 to now, 2022, 8 to 10 years I was sober. I relapsed once or twice, but it was quickly resolved with treatment and AA. Anyway, when he gave me custody back in 2015, all was well till I went to treatment in 2016. I had relapsed for 4 months. I told my child's dad and was honest, and he was supportive, saying he knew I could get back on track. He worked out of state, so my grandma took care of our kid while I went to get help. I've been sober to this day. The next 2 years, he wasn't around much because of work. He sent money to support, and I understood his situation. Fast forward to 2018, he wants to move out of state for work, 19 hours away. He asks if our kid can go with him for the summer. We agreed that if our kid wanted to stay and live there, I would visit and he would come home for the summers. All was fine until he crossed state lines. I went to visit and felt like I was under a radar. He wouldn't let my kid spend the night with me and wanted my locations and updates each day. Summer came around. There were a million excuses as to why our kid couldn't come home for the summer. By the way, I was sending money monthly and buying whatever I could help with at the time. I expressed my concerns and they weren't listened to. I tried to set plans for the next summer so there weren't any excuses and was met with, "That's too far to plan ahead." I realized our child was never going to come for summer. Keep in mind, we were getting along during this time, and I was also making an effort to get along with his new girlfriend. She adores our kid, and I trust her. 2019 rolls around. They are all coming home to visit for their wedding, in which I am invited too. I had retained an attorney to help me get clean custody that was fair and protected my rights. We tried to serve in the state they lived in, but because of our past agreement in 2014, I had to serve him here. I didn't give him a heads up, so he was served 2 days before their wedding. It was my only chance to serve papers. I was uninvited, clearly, and have not had a single convo with his now wife since 2019. They ended up moving back in 2020. I have joint custody now. It would have been 50-50 if I had a job that enabled me to be home daily. I worked offshore. We don't really get along these days, and it is kept very simple. Am I in the wrong for wanting to protect my rights and serving before the wedding? My mother died and my sister refuses to bury her. Am I in the wrong for cutting off all ties? I have an older sister. We are both well over 40. Our mother suddenly became ill and died within a few days pre-COVID. I live in another city. My sister lives very close and took on a caregiver role since she didn't work. She was supposed to make sure that mom had groceries and get her to medical appointments. After she died, my sister claimed she couldn't find the will. After I said that just means it will take longer and we each get 50-50 of the estate, suddenly the will appeared and it said we got 50-50 and were co-executors. She asked me to let her use the house because her boyfriend didn't like going to her house because her ex drops by unannounced. I said no, that's not fair to me. Let's sell or you can buy me out. She stopped participating in anything to do with the estate. She refused to have a burial. I took the ashes because I didn't want them stored in a storage room. I had to fight with her to agree to sell. I cleared out all the belongings except what she wanted. It took her until the day before the new owners took possession to pick up 2 truckloads of stuff from the house, and she left a huge mess. We fought for 2 years over paying out the estate. She just refused to co-sign in a check stating her accountant said no. Eventually, I threatened a lawsuit to get my half. Since that, it's been a year. I've made multiple attempts to save the relationship, including having a glass ornament with her ashes in it made and given to her. I've kept in touch with my adult niece and nephew. I kept up with holiday and birthday greetings. She still refuses to set a burial date. I think I'm just going to book it and inform her. It's been 4 years. I've accepted I won't have a relationship with her. Am I in the wrong? We hope you enjoyed today's stories. Use the comment section below to state your verdict on the situation, express your opinions, and share some valuable advice.